When Herod became king, he embarked on a building program that would secure his empire and his power in this part of the world. Would also change the face architecturally of this country. His projects are unbelievable. They provided for him security from his many enemies, both in other countries and with his own land. They also provided a kind of power and glory to Israel that Israel hadn't seen in a while. South of here, near the Dead Sea, is Masada, that enormous desert fortress, out where it never rains. And on top of that rock, Herod built freshwater swimming pools with water brought up from cisterns down below. A western palace with mosaic floors that are beautiful to this day. Hot and cold baths with painted frescoes. And a hanging palace on the northern end that must have been one of the marvels of the ancient world. And then there's Caesarea, to the north and west on the seacoast. A beautiful theater seating more than 4,000 people. A palace with a freshwater swimming pool 100 yards out into the salt water of the Mediterranean Sea, where Herod could swim and enjoy the beauty of the beach and the sun. And then there's Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, by double the largest temple enclosure of its day. Unbelievable. And in that Temple Mount, stones that engineers and construction workers marvel at even today. Some of them weigh as much as 650 tons. They were put 30 or 40 feet above the street in the wall. Now it's true, Herod had the vision and the wealth and the desire to build things like that for his own reputation and to advance the cause of his view of life, Hellenism. In some way, though, we need to give credit as well to those Jewish engineers, architects, and especially those Jewish stonemasons who could create such beauty. But it was Herod, and it made Herod strong and famous, and he thought safe. In the days of Herod the king, Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. Most Westerners who will celebrate Christmas this year have no idea the content Matthew put into that statement with which he begins the story of the birth of Jesus. Herod was the greatest king the Middle East had ever known, an Idumean who, through various political intrigue and marriage into the Jewish royal line, and with Roman support, had become the king of the Jews. Around this country, that king had built gigantic fortresses and palaces, but none greater than his fortress palace called the Herodium, just a few miles from Bethlehem, out at the edge of the Judean wilderness. This was originally a triclinium, a large, beautiful dining hall. Had a mosaic floor, the walls plastered with a beautiful fresco in that distinctive red and brown and tan that Herod was so famous for Here we walk out into the main part of the upper fortress. On this end, an apse. 2 columns and a statue, probably the Roman emperor, maybe. Probably not Herod. He didn't make statues of himself. On this end, you can still see the plaster on those walls. Still hanging there after 2,000 years, that distinctive margin and boss style. And this tower stood originally 120 feet high, 55 feet in diameter, the bottom third solid, and up above several stories of apartments. Some scholars think maybe Herod and his family lived up there. Must have been a spectacular view in those days. Around the outside, circular walls, about 20 feet apart, one outside, one inside, and people actually lived in apartments between the walls. And below, a peristyle garden. Exotic fruit trees, olives, figs, dates. Herod could go for a stroll in the shade when the sun was hot, or in the evening he could enjoy the smell of fresh flowers. Over here, a cistern system, unbelievable. Brought water to cisterns at the base, and then they carried it up to some upper cisterns. There's even one in the tower here. Over here, the baths. The vaults are still standing, at least one of them is. Mosaic, the fresco in there, little piece near the bottom, just beautiful, just a hint of the glory of this place that was Herod. Unbelievable. Herod, king of the Jews, mentioned a couple of times in the Bible, but what Herod brought to this country is difficult even to describe. Who was this Herod, king of the Jews? Well, actually, he wasn't really even Jewish. His family came from Idumea in the south. He had become king of the Jews in 37 BC through political intrigue. He married into the royal Jewish family, the Hasmoneans, and he had Roman support. The Romans, who had conquered the world shortly before, now saw Herod as a good king who could support their interests in this part of the Jewish world. Where did Herod choose to build this unbelievable fortress? Well, he chose to build it near Bethlehem. Bethlehem in those days was a small village, not like the large town that it is today, just a small town on the edge of the Judah wilderness. Maybe 100, 200, maybe 300 people at the very most. Probably not unlike the small villages near the Herodian today. But it was to that town, that small village, that Miriam, a young Jewish girl who was pregnant, and her husband Joseph came. And it was there, within the context of where this Herodian fortress stands, that Jesus was born. He was born and placed in a manger. Now, typically in this country where the shepherds live, mangers are in a stable or small caves out in the countryside, or maybe even in town, sometimes even under people's homes. It's quite an experience to walk in one of those caves. The smell is overpowering. Several feet of manure on the floor from the thousands of sheep over hundreds and even thousands of years that have used the same caves over and over and over again as a sheepfold. The soot on the ceiling from 1,000 shepherds' fires. Small enclosure at one end where the shepherd could put the lambs, or where the shepherds could keep their own belongings to keep them away from the sheep. It's quite a contrast with the typical celebration of Christmas. In some ways, we Western Christians have really sterilized and made pretty and beautiful that Christmas night with a wooden barn and straw and hay and clean animals. It wasn't like that. It was much more likely a dirty place, a dark place, without fresh straw. And that's the place where Jesus, whom the Bible calls Messiah, the Son of God, was born. One can only imagine what Mary and Joseph thought as they walked down the road past a palace like this with all its glory. And Mary, knowing at least what she had been told by the angel, that the baby was to be Messiah, to walk past that fortress took quite an act of faith for that young girl. It's quite unbelievable in a way. Her husband Joseph the same, and the shepherds, when they got the message that the Messiah was born, must have first looked up to this palace and thought, King Herod has an heir. But no, not the palace, a stable, which they knew well. And the wise men would come later. By that time, Jesus was in a house in Bethlehem somewhere, but they too walked past this great fortress to get to the house to see the young child. What did they think? Did they think how impossible it must have been for the baby to be in a manger and in a cave and not in this palace? How could it be? How could it be that the Messiah was so weak and so small, that the king was in a shepherd's cave, and the Edomite sat in the biggest palace in the world with all the power, comfort, and glory? Well, the Bible writers asked for an unbelievable commitment of faith. They asked those early believers to trust God, that the King of the universe was not in this palace. The King of the universe was in a shepherd's cave. And this man, for all his glory, would be nothing. Nothing. Mary believed it. Joseph did. Those young shepherds did. The wise men did. Many others did too. There's one man that night who believed it with all his heart. And his name? Herod. When he heard that a Messiah, a king, had been born to the Jews, even if it was a king in a cave, it scared him to death. And out of his fortress somewhere, again, maybe this one, came his troops to go out to slaughter the children, to try and kill the king. God is amazing. Why he would choose to put the greatest Edomite on the stage when the Messiah was born is hard to comprehend. But it is clear that he wanted a commitment from his people that the Messiah, for all of his apparent weakness, was really the King of the universe. God decided that his way of bringing Messiah in the world was not to place him in a palace, not to put him in Herod's family, but to put him in the family of David, in the city of David, and in a shepherd's cave. Quite a story. Well, there are a couple of things that come to mind as you stand in the ruins of Herod's fortress. The first is exactly that. Herod built all over this country with power and vision. He must have stood out to the people of his day as one of the great men who had ever walked this land. Maybe not morally, maybe not in the cruelty he had, but certainly in the vision he had for his country and for his construction and for himself, the reputation that he built. But today people come here to look at ruins, impressive ruins, but ruins. The ruins speak of the greatness of a man, but they also speak of the fact that his vision is gone. He died and was buried here, no less. And for most of you, if not all of you, the only thing you ever knew about Herod was that he killed little babies at Christmas time. Herod, you see, built for Herod. He built that people would remember who he was and what he was and how great he was. He built for himself. And in the end, there was nothing. But the baby in the cave, well, there have been things done in his name in history that haven't been right either. But the baby in the cave started a movement started a community, a faith, a belief, which is still growing, which still captures the hearts, the minds of people, small and great. It still transforms lives. It still redeems. It still grows. And that baby didn't leave one stone on another that we know of. And yet what he did leave was a great vision, a great salvation, a great idea. There are a lot of Herods in our world. There are a lot of great people, great movements, great ideas, great attractions, which communicate a value system that is not what God is all about. And they look so strong and so powerful. And yet God says, the King of the universe is Jesus. No matter what it looks like, no matter how weak he seems, no matter how distant he seems, no matter how strong the Herods of our world appear, it is not Herod. It's Jesus who's the King of the universe. Have you seen him? Have you recognized his greatness and his power? Have you marveled this Christmas with a God who finds strength in weakness? I hope you have. And I hope that you see, by putting those two in history together, God has declared that his way is the way of salvation.